We are continuing our conversation with Dan Gerstein about Connecticut politics. You mentioned Linda McMahon. Let's talk about her. She spent more than $6 million now of her own money. What's your impression of how she's doing campaign-wise?
Well, I think money does talk in politics. There's no question about it. Money can't compensate for a bad candidate or a bad message, but what it can do is quickly elevate someone who is not necessarily that well known and make them a factor. And I think you're seeing that with Linda McMahon. My impression, she's running at the right moment to kind of tap into the discontent with Washington, politics as usual. The fact that she's a woman and the only woman in the race, I think, is a big factor in her favor. And I think to a certain degree, Rob Simmons, even though he's trying to tap into that Tea Party fervor, I think is probably tainted to some degree by having been in Congress for as long as he was and can't compete with Linda McMahon on sort of the outsider. It's a tough slot for him to fill.
Right.
And I think she's going to have a lot of the momentum. I think she has a better message. And the combination of the message with the money, I think it's probably enough she's going to win that race.
Right, because a big part of her message is that she's not a career politician, that she's going to be a fresh voice in Washington. Another non-career politician, of course, is Peter Schiff, who you said you've known or you've met. Your impressions of Mr. Schiff's race?
I think he will appeal to a very narrow slice of the electorate. He'll be entertaining. He'll spice things up. He'll challenge the other candidates, but I don't think it'll be an electoral factor at the end of the day.
How legitimate do you think the criticisms or the talk to Linda McMahon is about her involvement with the WWE, which people think is misogynistic and perhaps turned a blind eye to steroids and glorifies violence? I mean, do you think those are legitimate issues to bring up in the campaign?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. If I were Rob Simmons, I would be hammering her on that. The interesting thing, though, is Linda McMahon is going to benefit from the fact of Connecticut being a socially tolerant state and not having as many family values voters per se as you might have in a place like Wisconsin, Minnesota, or the Mountain West in a Republican primary. So I tend to think that it's not going to be as damaging to her. It might be in other Republican primaries. But she's making her business background part of the campaign, a central part of the campaign. So it's totally legitimate to be then saying, okay, let's look at her business practices, and is that the kind of business leader we want in Washington? I don't think it will be ultimately effective in the Republican primary enough to damage her or disqualify her, but I think it's going to be an issue, and I think it will definitely be an issue in the general election campaign.
Now, do you think that anyone has yet made any missteps? I mean, if you were helping to run their campaigns? Or do you think that anybody's should be doing something that they're not doing? I mean,
I think to a certain extent, some of the candidates are just sort of locked into where they are, and it's not so much their strategy is wrong, but they're running at the wrong time, or they're ill-matched to the mood of the electorate. And I can go back to Rob Simmons again. Rob Simmons is a solid guy. He had a lot of goodwill in the Republican Party for the time he was in Congress, but is he the right guy at this moment when there's an angry electorate to be railing against Washington when he was part of the problem in certain respects? You look back to the Bush years when which angered a lot of Republicans, was you had a Congress that was running up record spending and record deficits, and Rob Simmons was there.
All right. Well, so no missteps that you've seen yet, perhaps, but you do think there have been some missteps in this whole health care reform debate. I read your Forbes article this week, and you were fairly critical of the way it panned out, right?
Well, yeah, I was really kind of taken by how both sides have been talking about the bill with such certainty, right? Such absolute certainty that
like it is this way.
The Democrats, it's going to save health care, it's going to lower costs for everybody, we're going to cover everyone. And you start kind of looking below the surface at some of the assumptions that's based on, and it may work, but a lot of those assumptions are very questionable at best. One of the examples I like to cite is there's a requirement everyone's going to have to buy insurance, right? And the only way that can work and be enforced is you have to have a penalty. You have to have a disincentive to get people to buy into the system.
Right.
The penalty, to make it politically palatable, $750 a year. So for a young 20-something, is that really enough to get them to pony up $2,500, for example, to pay for a low-cost policy for the year? if they're going to do in the cost benefit, they're going to save money by paying the penalty. So that means that a lot of people probably won't enter the system that they maybe assume they will.
Right. Interesting. And you also had pointed out in our earlier conversations that you thought it was perhaps interesting that the Connecticut congressional delegation didn't do more to step up to protect the insurance industry?
Yeah, I think it's a measure of how angry people are at the insurance industry, like they're angry at Washington. I think there's equal opportunity anger at business institutions as well as government institutions. That even in this home state of the insurance industry, you didn't see any member of Congress rushing to defend, not even just anything their behavior, but to kind of say, wait a second, we employ a lot of people here, and stop demonizing these companies. No one did that, and I think that is that's a real damaging and damning indictment of the behavior of the insurance industry, even their home state folks. Unlike, say, in Detroit, where John Dingell, the longtime legendary congressman from Michigan, even when GM was getting bailed out, didn't abandon them.
Right, right. Well, who's going to step up, though? I mean, I'm thinking that perhaps, in earlier years, Senator Dodd might have stepped up, but who's going to step up now in his absence, do you think? I mean, of the lawmakers that we have there now?
Well, I mean, I think you're seeing...
Not just about insurance, but in general.
Yeah, well, I think what's very interesting is, John Larson is in leadership in the House and is very popular in that caucus and is a trusted advisor of Nancy Pelosi. And then you have Rosa DeLauro, who is a senior member of the Democratic caucus, also, part of the top leadership there. I keep an eye on Chris Murphy, obviously very ambitious. He's already talked about potentially running against my former boss, Senator Lieberman.
And he's been pretty quiet. We don't hear a lot about Joe Lieberman anymore.
Well, I think that's to some extent that the controversy of what happened with the health care bill has gone away, and I think he's focused on doing his job. So I would watch out for Chris Murphy. I think he is going to be someone to watch and is very ambitious. And I think to a certain degree, he has not been there long enough to kind of get tarred with the Washington insider, the career politician. And I think to some degree that will help him because even though he's already in Congress, he's still a fresh face. And it's kind of funny, we were talking about this earlier, about, used to be experience was a big bonus, and now not so much. We have a president who had very little experience getting elected. It's the time of the outsider. And so, look at the rise of Linda McMahon. And so, I think you'll see Chris Murphy, if he does run for Senate, really position himself as kind of a populist and distance himself to a certain degree from Washington.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for coming up from New York and spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Dan GERSTEIN of Gotham Ghostwriters in New York for coming. Ahead, everyone has an angle on health care. We're talking next to AARP's state director about concerns and questions from senior citizens about what reform means for them.